Hello friends, today we are going to see the third part of the story. Let's get into the story. The Larriston Garden Mystery. I confess that I was considerably startled by this fresh proof of his practical nature of my companion's theories. My respect for his power of analysis increased wondrously. There still remained some lurking suspicion in my mind, however, that the whole thing was a prearranged episode intended to dazzle me. Though what earthly object he could have been taking in me in past my comprehension. When I looked at him, he had finished reading the note and his eyes had assumed the vacant, lackluster expression which showed mental abstraction. How in the world did you deduce that? I asked. Deduce what? He said. Why, that he was a retired sergeant of marine. I have no time for trifles, he answered. Then, with a smile, excuse my rudeness, you broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it is as well. So, you actually were not able to see that the man was a sergeant of marine? No, indeed. Ah, it was easy to know than to explain why I knew it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Even across the street, I could see a great blue anchor tattooed on the back of the fellow's hand that smacked of a sea. He had a military carriage, however, and regulations side whiskers. There we have the marine. He was a man with amount of self-importance and a certain air of command. You must have observed the way in which he held his hand and his head and swung his cane. A steady, respectable, middle-aged man, too. On the face of him, all facts which led me to believe that he had been a sergeant. Wonderful! I ejaculated. Commonplace, said Holmes. Though I thought from his expressions that he was pleased at my evident surprise and admiration. I said just now that there were no criminals. It appears that I am wrong. Look at this. He threw me over the note which the commissioner had brought. Why? I cried as I cast my eye over it. This is terrible. It does seem to be a little out of common, he remarked very calmly. Would you mind reading it to me loud? This is the letter which I read to him. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, there has been a bad business during the night at 3, Larriston Garden. Our men on this beat saw a light there but 2 in the morning, and as the house was an empty one, suspected that something was amiss. He found the door open and in front of the room, which is bare of furniture, discovered the body of a gentleman, well dressed and having cards in his pocket bearing the name of Enoch J. Drebber, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. There had been no robbery, nor is there any evidence as to how the man met his death. There are marks of blood in the room, but there is no wound upon his person. We are at a loss as to how he came to the empty room. Indeed, the whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come around to the house any time before the 12, you will find me there. I have left everything in state quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you fuller detail and would esteem it a great kindness if you would favor me with this opinion. Yours faithfully, Tobias Gregson. Oh, Grayson is the smartest man in the Scotland Yarders, my friend remarked to him. He and Lestrade are the pick of a bad lot. They are both quick and energetic, but conventional, shockingly so. They have their knives into one another too. There are jealous between the pairs of professional beauties. There will be some fun over this case if they are both put upon the scent. I was amazed at the calm way in which he rippled on. Surely, there is not a moment to be lost, I cried. Shall I go and order you a cab? I am not sure about whether I shall go. I am the most incurably lazy devil that ever stood in shoe leather. That is, when the fit is on me, for I can spray enough any time. Why, it is just such a chance as you have been longing for. My dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I unravel the whole matter, You may be sure that Grayson, Lestrade, and Co. will pocket all the credit that comes of being an unofficial personage. But he begs you to help him. Yes, he knows that I am his superior and acknowledge it to me. But he would cut it his tongue out before he would own it any third person. However, we may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them if I have nothing else. Come on! He hustled on his overcoat and bustled about in a way that showed that an energetic fit had suppressed the apathetic one. Get your hats, he said. You wish me to come? Yes, if you have nothing better to do. A minute later, we were both in a hansom, driving furiously for the Brixton Road. It was a foggy, cloudy morning, and a dun clouded veil hung over the housetops, looking like the reflection of the mud-colored streets beneath. My companion was in the best of spirit and prattled away about Cremona Findles, and as for myself, I was silent for the dull weather and melancholy business upon which we were engaged, depressed by spirit. You don't seem to give much thought into this matter in hand, I said at last, interrupting Holmes' musical distinction. No data yet, he answered. It is a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment. You will have your data soon, I remarked, pointing with my finger. This is the Brixton Road, and that is the house, if I am not very much mistaken. So it is. Stop, driver, stop! We were still 100 yards or so from it, but he insisted upon our alighting, and we finished our journey upon foot. Number 3, Lariston Gardens, wore an ill-omened and minority look. It was one of 4 which stood back some little way from the street, 2 being occupied and 2 empty. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant, a small garden sprinkled over with scattered eruption of sickly planted separated each of these houses from the street, and was traversed by a narrow path, yellowish in color, and consisting apparently of a mixture of clay and of a gravel. The whole place was very sloppy from the rain which had fallen through the night. The garden was bounded by 3-foot brick wall with a fringe of wood rails upon the top, and against this wall was leaning a stalwart police constable, surrounded by a small knot of loafers who craned their necks and strained their eyes in the vain hope of catching some glimpse of proceeding within. I had imagined that Sherlock Holmes would at once have hurried into the house and plunged into a study of the mystery. Nothing appeared to be further from this intention. With an air of nonchalance which, under the circumstance, seems to me to border upon affectation, he lodged upon and down pavement, and gazed vacantly at the ground, the sky, the opposite houses, and lines of the railing. Having finished his scrutiny, he proceeded slowly down the path, or rather down the fringe of the grass which flanked the path, keeping his eyes riveted upon the ground. Twice he stopped, and once I saw him smile, and heard him utter an exclamation of satisfaction. There were many marks of footsteps upon the wet clay soil, but since the police had been coming and going over it, I was unable to see how my companion could hope to learn anything from it. Still, I had such extraordinary evidence in the quickness of his perceptive faculties, and that I had no doubt that he could see a great deal which was hidden from me. At the door of the house, we were met by a tall, white-faced, flaxen-haired man, with a notebook in his hand, who rushed forward and wrung my companion's hands with effusion. "It is indeed the kind of you to come," he said. "I have everything left untouched." "Except that," my friend answered, pointing at the pathway. "If I heard the buffaloes has passed along, there could not be a greater mess. No doubt, however, you had drawn your own conclusions, Grayson, before you permitted this." "I have had so much to do inside the house," the detective said evasively. "My colleague, Mr. Lestrade, is here. I had replied upon him to look after this." Holmes glanced at me and raised his eyebrows sardonically. Oh, with two such men as yourself and Lestrade upon the ground, there will not be much for a third party to find out, he said. Grayson rubbed his hands in a self-satisfied way. I think we have done all that we can do be done, he answered. It's a cure case, though, and I knew your taste for such things. Hi, you did not come here in a cab? Asked Sherlock Holmes. No, sir. Nor Lestrade? No, sir. Then let us go and look around the room. With which inconsequent remark, he strolled on into the house, followed by Grayson, who features expressed his astonishment. A short passage, bare-planked and dusty, led to the kitchen and the office. Two doors opened out of it to the left and to the right. One of these had obviously been closed for many weeks. The other belonged to the dining room, which was the apartment in which the mysterious affair had occurred. Holmes walked in, and I followed him with a subdued feeling at my heart which the presence of death inspires. It was a large square room, looking all the larger from the absence of all furniture. A vulgar flaring paper adorned the walls, but it was blotched in places with mildews, and here and there great strips had become detached and hung down, exposing the yellow plaster beneath. Opposite the door was surely fireplace, surmounted by a mantelpiece of intimation white marble. On one corner of this was struck the stump of a red wax candle. The solitary window was so dirty that the light was hazy and uncertain, giving a dull grey tinge to everything, which was intensified by the thick layer of dust which coated the whole apartment. All these details I observed afterwards. At present, my attention was centered upon the single grim, motionless figure which lay stretched upon the boards, which vacant, sightless eye straighting up and the discoloring ceiling. It was that the man, about 43 or 44 years of age, middle-sized, broad-shouldered, with crisp curling black hair, and a short, stubbly beard. He was dressed in a heavy, brockled frock coat and waistcoat, with light-colored trousers and immaculate collar and cuffs. A top hat, well brushed and trimmed, was placed upon the floor beside him. His hands were clenched and his arms thrown abroad, while his lower limbs were interlocked as though his death struggle had been a grievous one. On his rigid face there stood an expression of horror, and, as it seems to me, of hatred, such as I have never seen upon human features. This malignant and terrible coronation, combined with the low forehead, blunt nose, and prognathous jaw, gave the death of a man singularly sinuous and ape-like appearance, which was increased by his writhing and unnatural posture. I have seen death in many forms, but never had it appear to me in more fearsome aspect than in that dark, grimy apartment which looked upon one of the main arteries of suburban London. Lestrade, lean and fritter-like as ever, was standing by the doorway and greeted my companion and myself. "This case will make us tear, sir," he remarked. "It beats anything I have seen, and I am no chicken." "There is no clue," said Grayson. "None. It is none at all," chimed Lestrade. Sherlock Holmes approached the body and, kneeling down, examining it intently. "You are sure that there is no wound?" he asked, pointing to the numerous gouts and splashes of blood which lay all around. "Positive," cried both the detectives. "Then of course this blood belongs to a second individual, presumably the murderer, if the murder has been committed. It reminds me of the circumstance attended on the death of Van Jason in Utrecht in the year 34. Do you remember the case, Grayson?" "No, sir." "Read it up. You really should. There is nothing new under the sun. It has all been done before." As we spoke, his nibble fingers were flying here and there and everywhere, feeling, pressing, unbuttoning, examining, while his eyes were seen, faraway expression which I have already remarked upon. So swiftly was the examination made that one would hardly have guessed the minuteness within which it was conducted. Finally, he sniffed the dead man's lip and then glanced at the sole of his patent leathered boots. "He has not been moved at all?" he asked. "No, no more than was necessary for the purpose of our examination." "So, you can take him to the mortuary now," he said. "There is nothing more to be learned." Grayson had a stretcher and 4 men at hand. At his call, they entered the room, and the stranger was lifted and carried out. As they raised him, a ring tinkled down and rolled across the floor. Lestrade grabbed it upon and stared at it with mystified eyes. "There's been a woman here?" he cried. "It's a woman's wedding ring." He held it out as he spoke, upon the palm of his hand. We all gathered around him and gazed at it. There could be no doubt that circlet of plain gold had now once adorned the fingers of a bride. "This complicates the matter," said Grayson. "Heaven knows they were complicated enough before." "Oh, you're sure?" "It doesn't simplify them," observed Holmes. "There's nothing to be learned by staring at it. What did you find in his pocket?" "We have it all here," said Grayson, pointing to litter of objects upon one of the bottom steps of the stairs. "A gold watch, number 97163 by Barrows of London. Gold Albert chain, very heavy and solid. Gold ring with Masonic device. Gold pin, bulldog's head with rubies as eyes. Russian leather card case with cards of Enoch J. Deber of Cleveland corresponding with EJD upon the linen. No purse, but loose money to the extent of £7 13. Pocket edition of Boccaccio's Deckerman, with name of Joseph Stangerson upon the flyleaf. 2 letters, one addressed to E.J. Deber and one to Joseph Stangerson. At what address? American Exchange, Strand, to be left till called for. They are both from Guyan Steamship Company, and referred to the sailing of their boats from Liverpool. It is clear that this unfortunate man was about to return to Newark. Have you made any inquiries as to this man, Strangerson? I did it at once, sir, said Grayson. I have had advertisement sent to all the newspapers, and one of my men has gone to the American Exchange, but he has not returned yet. Oh, have you sent to Cleveland? We telegraphed this morning. How did your word inquiries? We simply detailed the circumstances and said that we should be glad of any information which could help us. Oh, you did not ask for particulars on any point which appears to you be a crucial one? I asked about Strangerson. Nothing else? Is there any no circumstance on which this whole case appears to hinge? Will you not telegraph again? I have said all I have to say, said Grayson in an offended voice. Sherlock Holmes chuckled to himself and appeared to be about to make some remark, when Lestrade, who had been in front of the room while we were holding his conversation in the hall, reappeared upon the scene, rubbing his hands in a pompous and self-satisfied manner. Mr. Grayson, he said, I have just made a discovery of highest importance, and one which would have been overlooked had I not made a careful examination of the walls. Oh, the little man's eyes sparkled as he spoke, and he was evidently in a state of suppressed exultation at having scored a point against his colleague. Come here, he said, bustling back into the room, the atmosphere which felt clearer since the removal of its ghastly intimate. Now stand there. We struck a match on his boot and helped it against the wall. Look at that, he said triumphantly. I have remarked that the paper had fallen away in parts. In this particular corner of the room, a large piece had peeled off, leaving a yellow square of corpus plastering. Across this, a bare space was there, and scrawled in blood-red letters with single word, Raichi. What do you think of that? He cried, the detective, with the air of a showman exhibiting his show. This was overlooked because it was the darkest corner of the room, and no one thought of looking there. The murderer has written it with his or her own blood. See this, smears with it has trickled down the wall. That disposes of idea of suicide anyhow. Why was that corner chosen to write it on? I will tell you. See that candle on the mantelpiece? It was lit at the time, and if it was lit, this corner would be the brightest instead of the darkest portion of the wall. And what does it mean now that you have found it? Asked Grayson in a depreciatory voice. Means? Why? It means that the writer was going to put the female name Rachel but was disturbed before he or she had time to finish. You mark my words, when this case comes to cleared up, you will find that woman named Rachel has something to do with it. It's all very well from you to laugh, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. You may be very smart and clever, but the old hound is the best when all this said and done. Oh, I really beg your pardon, said my companion, who had ruffled the little man's temper by bursting into an explosion of laughter. So, you certainly have the credit of being the first of us to find this out, and you say it bears every mark of having been written by the other participant in last night's mystery. I have not had time to examine this room yet, but with your permission, I shall do so now. As he spoke, he whipped a tape measure and a large round magnifying glass from his pocket. With these two implements, he trotted noiselessly about the room, sometimes stomping, occasionally kneeling, and once lying flat upon his face. So engrossed was he with his occupation that he appeared to have forgotten our presence, for he chattered away to himself under his breath the whole time, keeping up a running fire of explanations, groans, bristles, and a little cries suggestive of encouragement and of hope. As I watched him, I was irresistibly reminded of a pure-blooded, well-trained foxhound as it dashes backwards and forward through the covert, whining in its eagerness until it comes across the lost scent. For 20 minutes or more, he continued his researches, measuring with the most exact care of the distance between the marks, which were entirely invisible to me, and occasionally applying his tape to the walls in an equally incomprehensible manner. In one place, he gathered up very carefully a little pile of grey dust from the floor and packed it away in an envelope. Finally, he examined with his glass the word upon the wall, going over every letter of it with the most minute exactness. This is done. He appeared to be satisfied, for he replaced the tape and his glass in his pocket. They say that the genius is an infinite capacity for taking pains, he remarked with a smile, Mr. Grayson. It's a very bad definition, but it does not apply to detective work. Grayson and Lestrade had watched the maneuvers of their amateur companion with considerable curiosity and some contempt. They evidently failed to appreciate the fact, which I had begun to realize, that Sherlock Holmes' smallest actions were all directed towards some definite and practical end. What do you think of it, sir? They both asked. It would be robbing you the credit of the case if I was to presume to help you, remarked by my friend. You are doing so well now that it would be a pity for anyone to interfere. There was a world of sarcasm in his voice as he spoke. If you will let me know how your investigations go, he continued, I shall be happy to give you any help I can. In the meantime, I should be like to speak to the constable who found the body. Can you give me his name and address? Lestrade glanced at his notebook. John Rance, he said. He is off the duty. You will find him at 46 Audley Court, Kennington Park Gate. Holmes took a note of the address. Come along, doctor, he said. We shall go and look up him. I will tell you one thing that which may help you in this case, he continued, turning to the two detectives. There has been murder done, and the murderer was a man. He was more than 6 feet high. He was in prime of life, had small feet for his height, wore chorus, square-toned boot, smoked a Trichinopolis cigar. He came here with his victim in a four-wheeled cab, which was drawn by a horse with three old shoes and one new one of four leg. In all probability, the murderer had a florid face, and the fingernails of his right hand were remarkably long. These are only a few indications, but they may assist you. Lestrade and Grayson glanced at each other with an incredulous smile. If this man was murdered, how was it done? Grayson asked the former. Poison, said Sherlock Holmes curtly, and strode off. One other thing, Lestrade, he added, turning around the door. Rage. It is a German for revenge. So don't lose your time looking for Miss Rachel. With which, puffy and short, he walked away, leaving the two rivals open-mouthed behind him.